Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
For years, I've read stories about people suddenly feeling a strong, oppressive force when walking in the forest. Sometimes this powerful change in atmosphere causes the person to momentarily feel frozen with fear. They begin to feel that they are no longer welcomed in the woods and that they must leave immediately. Has anyone ever experienced this?
I hear you. I'm from the northern part of Europe and our forests are wide and deep. There's definitely a sense of unknown malice as you stray deeper into these woods. I've never felt anything that I would describe as a presence. There's no entities or spirits living in the woods. Although I've felt this atmosphere takes on proportions strongly reminiscent of those invoked by presence of animals, people, or otherwise mischievous entities. Sometimes, if you've ever gotten lost in the forest, you grow frantic with fear, and the oppressive atmosphere, along with the knowledge of not knowing where you are, causes an almost catatonic state of terror in the face of the emptiness of the forest.
I live in England, right near a small set of woods where miners and large families used to live. Bricks and house debris still remain. Turns out my family has experienced a ton of creepy things there. I was walking through with my mum and we were approaching the end. We both felt that oppressive atmosphere you mention. I had stopped to take a photo but ended up running down the path in a panic LOL. My mum said 20 years ago she remembers walking through those same woods with my brother in his pushchair and his dad. Ahead of them they see a long black figure in a cloak descend from the trees. It appeared to be floating. They both saw it twice. She says it was around 5 p.m, still light outside. My brother's dad heard a woman screaming from the stream on another occasion and said it was terrifying. My brother, more recently, saw a huge light in those same woods. He said he'd never seen a light so big and blinding before. This was 3 a.m. as he was returning home from work. He said 2 of his friends saw a strange, dog-like figure running or crawling just outside the woods too, at an unimaginable speed. I'm glad I took the other route home today. Our town has too many ghost stories. I almost forgot to mention when I was younger, around 9 or 10 years old, I'd ran away from my mum like kids do. She was shouting at me, trying to find me, etc. I approach a bush and it starts rattling like crazy. Could have been an animal perhaps, but it must have had some weight behind it to shake a bush that much. Forests are spooky.
I have origins from the German part of France, Alsace, and our forests are huge and old, not as big as Scandinavian anons, but enough to have a connection with the spirits. As a child, I was visiting my grandparents' home, and we were picnicking in the woods. My sister and I went to play in the forest. Bad idea.jpg. We went something like 300 meters in the forest until we saw a boar piglet. It wasn't a piglet because it wasn't the season. His mother should have been nearby. He would have run away. Now that I think of it, it reminds me of an old folkloric legend about a spirit kidnapping children. Anyway, as we pet it, I begin to feel the presence. I've been in a woods a lot, and oh boy, never have I felt it. It felt as if a predator was around. I felt my guts closing themselves, and I heard voices in my head. Can't remember what they said. I knew I wasn't welcomed in the woods anymore. I don't remember much except that I took my sister by the hand, and we ran and cried to our grandfather and his brother until we hugged them. As they're hunters, they have guns, so they weren't afraid of any animals in our woods. They just laughed when we told them about the piglet.
Late fall, live in northern Maine where there's so few people that the towns don't even have names. I was maybe 13, goofing around in the woods with my dog, a little terrier. I hopped up on this stump and suddenly there was this intense feeling of panic and extreme heat, late fall, so bone cold but no snow, and I fell down onto the ground. At this point my dog has disappeared and I'm on the ground. I look across a creek and I see this thing, like a greyhound walking on its hind legs, but rippling with muscles and a head like a mountain man, huge, round, and hairy. It walked off deeper into the woods and I booked it home, where I found my dog sleeping outside.
I've always tried to maintain a respectful attitude when walking in the woods. I'm just a visitor. The forest is not my domain.
Interesting. I feel like I'm part of it. If I feel spooked, I remind myself that I'm the apex predator there. But I'm nonetheless respectful. I happen to meet deer, mice, eagles, falcons. We usually look at each other for a while before parting ways. Feels good, man.
I was driving through a large woodland last week, and the road bisects it, going around 30 miles per hour, narrow, twisting roads. Round a bend and there's a big lorry coming. Ease over to let it pass and it goes by. Start driving, still slow, and see a big stag at the side of the road and we lock eyes. I stop completely. It keeps looking at me for a few seconds, then slowly crosses. Just beautiful to see so close, and I'm glad I wasn't going faster. Strange thing is that I only really see deer in the early hours of the morning. I like to do long walks around 7 or 8 a.m. and there's a family in this area that I usually startle. Just odd to see around 1 p.m.
I live near woods at the edge of a large community. Hunters, poachers, weirdos, teens, and drug is frequent. I cannot say the same about always being the apex predator, because I do not carry a gun, and even if I did. But I do have the respect of the trees and have decided to dedicate my next 2 years eradicating an invasive vine that I noticed has been killing off many of the old-growth oaks. They welcome me, but plenty of visitors who are unwelcome.
I talk a lot when I'm in a woods. I'm usually on pretty remote trails, so I very rarely run into someone else, or else they'd think I'm crazy. I don't ramble constantly, but if I walk by something that is cool or pretty or a bug that's in the way, I usually say hey or tell it to be careful, etc. I talk to bugs and animals and the grass and trees, etc., just letting them know how much I respect them and thank them for making my surroundings so beautiful. I did this long before I started reading any X and was very young. I feel like maybe they appreciate it on some subconscious level, and it certainly can't hurt. Might save me from a spider bite or twisted ankle or something. It's 8 degrees at my usual hiking trail, and I wasn't really feeling freezing, or I'd be out there now chit-chatting as I wander through the foothills and into the forest. Geek related, my trail in the Idaho foothills.
There is a small forest on the border between Belgium and the Netherlands called Tommel. It reminds me of what you've opened with. The forest itself is a hot pot of strange and inexplainable events, and sudden bouts of terror is one of them. So are shadows that move toward light. People who become entranced and compelled to walk into the forest off the paths. Creatures with red glowing eyes that appear and disappear, but also creatures of shadow that appear as giants and have the ability to lock every muscle of a man's body into place, trapping you in your own body, in place. But also ghosts that lash out at those unwelcome. These are only a few of my personal experiences. Other locals swear they've seen the dead rise from the dirt on occasion, and some have seen a man in a white suit, accompanied with a large black dog, children that look pale and gray, laughing and beckoning onlookers to come play. When looking into its history, it became clear why it's such a wicked place. The name itself, Tommel, stems from the Latin name it once bore, tumulus, which means graveyard. During the Dark Ages, Tommel is where criminals were executed and displayed for all traveling between Turnhout and Breda. And in recent history, it was where the Germans executed and buried resistance fighters, but also where they entrenched themselves with the Allied forces and drove them out. My woods are dark and full of terrors.
I wonder why my woods, at least parts of it, seem to have such a more temperate spirit. Although there are some dark parts, especially by the river. But overall, they were once known as St. John's Woods. A seminary of Jesuit monks farmed the fields and took care of them. Stories of some really good people, even the area's only ever canonized saints, speckle its history.
Here's a story from over a decade ago now. Friend and I, age 10, decided to play in a woods, middle of summer, back in the days of non-stop sleepovers. Make our way through the woods to a friend's house, stumble upon a broken down trailer with a big blue tarp over it, needles and bottles strewn about. Use it as a marker, make a left and continue that way. Come to a depression. At the bottom is a burnt-down playground. Discarded beer bottles, burnt toddler-sized shoes, broken plastic and fold-out chairs, burnt tires as well. Leaves all over the place, out of place for summer. Friend gets freaked out, I want to investigate. Go downhill and make my way around the playground. Get an overwhelming feeling that we shouldn't be here. Go back to the top of the hill with a friend. We leave. Next day we made our way to the site. Brush is inexplicably thicker. Though we went down the same path, thorn vines appeared seemingly out of nowhere, branches protruding where they weren't the day before. Make our way finally back to the playground. About evening time, start hearing weird yips. Nope out of there. Next day, noonish. Brush is too thick for our 10-year-old selves to navigate. Always wondered what the hell was out there, though I guess I'm glad I never found out.
I have definitely felt this strange atmosphere hundreds of times before and can't seem to find an explanation. I feel like it is commonly shared throughout humanity, regardless of geographical location. I grew up in rural Ontario, Canada, and ever since I was 5 years old, my parents would let me wander off and play Innawoods while my mother was gardening or my father was mowing the lawn. Where I grew up, most of the forest strictly consisted of twisting jack pines and knotted deadfall. Behind our acreage was nothing but miles upon miles of dirt bike and ATV trails and bush. I would walk the trails alone and come back a few hours later, yet every exploration had its own strange element. Like any young kid, I'd find the strongest and largest stick I could properly wield and keep it by my side in case I was in trouble. A lot of times, I found myself sprinting down the trails due to this eerie atmosphere. I'd run until I collapsed, and I'd gather my thoughts to the sound of the tree limbs cracking and moving overhead. So many times I would hide and watch people picking blueberries just to observe the basic functions of human life. We are all so curious as children.
Yeah, I had a mountain and forest to myself as a kid. It's completely normal to get all those feelings.
Be me living in beautiful British Columbia, hunting with an uncle up at 100 Mile. Guy's an ass, drinks too much. Take the ATV out because I need some time away. Sweet ass grizzly, start going down some trails. Come to the bottom of a big dip with a T intersection. Which way to go? As I'm deciding, I suddenly notice something. It's quiet. I put that in quotes because it wasn't the absence of sound waves, rather a heaviness in the atmosphere. Look around, no discernible movement, strangely dark in between the trees. My face went .gif. Suddenly a very clear message from my subconscious. Move, now. Nope, out of there at a ludicrous speed without looking back. Didn't say anything until the next day. One of the guys had run into a couple people who were down there early the previous day. Apparently, as they were walking, they spotted 2 cougars on the path. They stop. Cougars stop. The group watches as one sits on the path as the other disappears into the bush. They promptly go back to camp. Not sure if a barely perceived threat is enough to get such a reaction from me, or if there is something to the whole paranormal forest stuff. But that's my tale.
When I was 8 years old, me and my 3 other friends played in the woods a lot. We lived in a densely wooded R in South Carolina. It was a big county, but not many people really lived there. We knew pretty much every inch of the woods near us. We spent every day there in the spring and summertime. But one day, we decided to explore an area we hadn't really been to before. For the most part, the entire day out there in the new section was good and fun like normal. But eventually we ran up on this old dilapidated shack out there. It was overgrown and very dark looking. As we ventured closer, I started to feel very uneasy. My skin was crawling and wouldn't stop. Goosebumps were constant and it was hard to breathe. Whatever that shack and area was, we definitely weren't wanted. It still makes me uncomfortable thinking about it now. Just reliving the whole thing in my head makes me feel scared. But thankfully, my other friends cowered out and we noped our way back home. And I'm a fat kid, always have been. And they were all skinny fit dudes who were about 3 years older than me, so they were leaving me behind very quickly. I tried my best to keep up with myself, but it wasn't working out, so I told them to go on home and I'd make my way back on my own. Eventually I lost sight of them, but knew I wasn't more than 30 minutes away from my house. But very gradually that same uneasy, terrifying feeling came back, the same chill and shortness of breath. And as I stated before, I'm familiar with the woods. I can navigate them well and know how to keep my cool. But this was different. Nothing felt right. So I picked up the pace and started jogging through the woods, and as I did this, I swear I heard something behind me. I don't know if it was an animal or what, but I had this feeling that if I turned around, I was done for. So pure fear kept me looking forward and rushing home, and for some reason, the light in the forest was very quickly fading all around me. It was only 5 p.m., and in the middle of summer it doesn't get dark until about 8 p.m., and as it grew darker, the rustling behind me got louder, and I could hear something breathing a few meters behind me. So with my fat, asthmatic body, I began sprinting as hard as I could, and I swear I ran for an hour when I wasn't far from home. I took a straight shot. It should have only taken me 30 minutes max to get out of those woods. It got harder and harder to see to the point where I could barely see my hand out in front of me. I started crying and screaming, panicking down to the very depths of my soul. But I made it. I could see lights coming from the windows of my house, and I heard my mom yelling for me. I called out to her and stumbled out of the woods into her arms. She could tell I was scared, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I didn't know what to say. I didn't speak of it for years after it happened. I had another weird experience while living in that area. This one is short, though. I was laying in bed at about 3 a.m. with my friend that was sleeping over. I had bunk beds. He was asleep and had been for hours. But I started to hear a light scratching coming from the sloot boards near my bed. I just ignored it and told myself it was a squirrel or rat under the house. But I started to feel this pressure and felt like I was being watched. I tried to go to sleep, but this sound started to swell in my head. I only know how to describe it as 100 voices, talking loudly all at once, picking up in volume and intensity gradually. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was panicked, and some sounded malicious. I've never told anyone I know about this, and it's never happened again. I really thought I was going insane.
Yes, I used to live in the woods, under my stepdad's roof. He had a really nice house deep in the woods. I loved to go outside and hike. Knew the entire area like the back of my hand. Real comfortable about the area. But sometimes things felt different, like the air was oppressive and it felt like I was surrounded. On those days I stayed inside. Sometimes that feeling would come upon me suddenly while hiking, and I wouldn't think I would live through it, even though I didn't see any danger. I could feel it. When that happened, I would try to walk calmly but as fast as possible home, trying to look like I wasn't afraid. Never investigated this, and it's been a very long time since I've lived there. I always wondered what the hell was going on though.
I'll go ahead and share a story of mine. I will always remember it because it was one of those times where I was absolutely certain that I had seen something that was physically there. I did not believe that it was just odd lighting or that it had anything to do with my imagination. And back when I was young, I did not really sense psychic phenomena other than instinctual feelings telling me to avoid a certain place or person. I think it happened when I was in my early teenage years. There were these secluded woods not too far from my house. My friend and I would walk back there sometimes and talk about turning the area into a place to play paintball. It was basically a small creek that quickly became elevated on the other side and sloped up into dense forest. It was rare to see anyone else back there, and I would often explore the area by myself. One day me and my friend were walking through those woods and we were going uphill. I am focused on talking about paintball or something of the sort. As we get to the crest of this hill, I look up and maybe 30 yards away is this dark figure, and it seemed to be looking in our direction. I look away for all of a split second and the thing is gone. I told my friend about it immediately. I didn't want to seem like I was too invested in proving my sanity and whatnot, so I just stopped talking about it pretty quickly. He said he believed me and that he had seen other stuff in the woods. I looked behind the log laying down horizontally where it had been. I was trying to find some kind of proof that this thing had been real. Of course I found nothing, but I felt adamant that what I had seen was not just my mind playing tricks on me. I hate to conjure up the typical imagery of Bigfoot, but it suited the description of this thing pretty well. And I didn't feel malevolence or some kind of bad vibe telling me to go away. I did feel, however, that whatever it was, that it was observing me and that something had happened for an instant to allow itself to be revealed. I would later learn that that particular friend's mother was deeply involved in this cult of metaphysics. I don't know if the two are related in any way. The experience is something that I just can't forget because of how stark of a visual contrast it had compared to its surroundings. I mean, when I looked at it directly, it seemed like a void. Not just dark but absent of light, like an abyss, or as if the light around it were being absorbed. I couldn't make out any facial features or much body structure other than being tall, having a dense muscle structure, and that it seemed to have dark matted hair all over its body. I don't know if I will ever have an explanation for what I saw, but being mostly skeptical of the paranormal all my young life, it was one of the experiences that began to chip away at my cynical and close-minded worldview.
I used to wander in the woods alone, off trails and just into the thick of it when I was younger. I have encountered this exact feeling several times, and not once did I have the willpower to overcome it. The best I can describe it is as a completely unnatural feeling. Something deep inside you is telling you it's time to go, now. You need to leave. It's beyond goosebumps and the shivers you get when you're nervous. It's a very real, very disturbing feeling of dread. Every time it happened to me, I quickly moved back the way I came and stayed out of the woods for a while after. I can't explain what it is that happens, but I was never brave enough to face it. If you've ever felt it too, you would surely agree. There is no feeling quite as gut-wrenching as that feeling of something is very wrong all alone, in the woods.
The modern man has been conditioned to be terrified of nature, freedom, privacy, being alone with your thoughts. These things frighten the soy boy. We hate our true home and we celebrate our modern high-tech prison instead. Cities, towns, and suburbs scare me more than anything in the woods.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.